Welcome to the June 29th episode of Reactive Consciousness, our in-depth podcast about what happened this week in pop culture. I am your host, OldManStompy, and this is...
Lotus Prince.
And PyroJackFrost.
Yep, so once again, for those of you who didn't watch on Tuesday, Vice is not here this week, so, fuck that guy. And,
Straight up. Wow, okay.
And let's get right into our recon topics for this week.
On the next week of Reactive Consciousness, OldManStompy is fired. Permanently.
Please don't. So anyway, for our first topic this week, so I was discussing with Pyro earlier today that something that we skipped during last week's discussion that got lost in the E3 sort of hubbub. Is that all of us to some extent have played Magic the Gathering.
Some more than others, but yes.
Yeah.
Like me more than both of you combined by about 10 times, I would assume. But we all play quite a bit. So part of what I wanted to talk about this week revolved around a lot of major changes that have gone on, or that were announced last week that got lost a bit in the E3 shuffle, especially for our podcast. So just to stage things a little bit, so I had talked about the set that had come out, or was about to come out, the last time I discussed Magic on the podcast. Amonkhet is an Egyptian-themed set, and it features as the villain Nicol Bolas, who is an Elder Dragon who has been around since, like, 1994. He's one of the oldest
legends.
He's
characters.
he's been around a lot longer than I thought he's been around, to be honest with you.
Yeah, he's an Elder Dragon legend.
Yeah, well, he's not called the Younger Dragon Legend. He's not new. So, basically, the story is that he took over the plane of Amonkhet. He's, like, declared himself the god pharaoh of this Egyptian-themed plane, and he's, like, taken it over to revitalize his powers. Like, the planeswalkers, like, these, like, minor gods in the storyline, used to be the primary driver of the Magic plotline, but I guess at some point the brand found that they weren't relatable enough, so about, maybe 10 years ago, they powered all the planeswalkers down to, like, close to the level of a high-level mage in Dungeons & Dragons. And so Nicol Bolas, he's not happy about this. He lost a lot of his power. He's not immortal anymore. So he's got all these schemes in place to try to, like, reacquire his power. So Amonkhet was, like, the prelude to that, and the new set is called The Hour of Devastation, where all the hero planeswalkers, go to his plane, and they just get the shit kicked out of them. By
Is this the second of three?
This is
or
the
last?
This is
second of two, okay.
Yes.
Oh, so like the conclusion is the Hour of Devastation or Destruction.
Yes. The stage one is we go to Nicol Bolas' house. Stage two is he beats the shit out of everybody.
Jeez. Wow.
So that's actually part of what I wanted to talk about. So sets used to be in Magic 3 blocks. The structure of a Magic year used to be every quarter they would release a large set that would take place in a plane, and then they would release 2 more small sets took place in the same plane, and then a core set, and the core set would be sort of targeted more towards beginning players, and it would be much simpler. And so you'd have 4 sets a year, and you'd also have like a Pro Tour season that would revolve around the set for that season. So a couple of years ago they changed it because apparently it was like really, really hard to take a set's mechanics and stretch it out for 3 sets. And the third set would always wind up, either the second set or the third set would always wind up being kind of boring because there just wasn't enough material to stretch out over a 3 set block.
Yeah, because wouldn't they usually add more mechanics in a second set, but not necessarily the third set?
Well, it depended, but in general, even if they did that, now you've got like 3 sets worth of mechanics that can just get plopped into the third set, and it gets a little muddled. So they split it up now, so they dropped the core set because they realized that you don't really know when beginner players are going to have an entry point to your game. Like, you can't assume they're going to walk in and buy, like, Magic 2010 or 10th edition or 11th edition. They're going to buy the set that looks really cool.
Correct.
So, yeah, so like Pyro is an elf player and a sliver player. You're a tribal player. So if there's a set that has some of that, you're going to buy that set. You're not going to buy the core set.
And the other thing is it depends on why you're playing. If you are playing with a bunch of your friends who are Magic players, they're probably going to get you in on whatever the current set is. Or if you are playing because you just notice it on the shelf and it looks cool, then yeah, it might not be the new set, but it might be whatever you see. Like, for instance, I know some people are probably really into Innistrad because of the whole gothic horror theme. And if you were to see a set like that, you'd probably be like, and even if it's 2 years old, sure, I'll pick this up.
Mm-hmm. So, Lotus, what was the last time you played Magic, and what drew you to do that? I know you've played it before.
I mean, I have played, but very rarely. Like, I'm not a deck builder. Like, the last time I played was probably when we went to some convention, like PAX or something, like PAX East, and they gave out, like, free samples of, like, 30 or 40 card decks of a single color, and all of us opened up the decks and played with a single or two color sets, and none of us knew what any of the cards were, so it was kind of fun to experience that. As far as playing with my own cards, I don't know, high school, like, I just slapped some stuff together. I'm like, let's try playing with these. You know, I wasn't really ever in the competitive scene.
Right, so that's actually kind of the point I was trying to make. Like, that's a better and more effective way, I think, to market. You market the set vertically. So you begin by, like, these free decks that just have common cards in them. Like, really simple cards that tell you a lot about what the colors are and, like, how they play. So you don't get wound up in, like, complicated rules, you know,
or even the exceptions. Like, blue has flying creatures, red has fireballs and 1/1 creatures, green has bigger stuff, like, etc., etc.
That's pretty close to the color philosophy. So Pyro and I were talking about this before, that, like, when we were talking with Vice, the color pie has changed so much since the last time you guys played, that, like, a lot of what you were talking about
was bullshit.
Was way up.
Really?
Hey, Vice isn't here, so I'll be a little nicer about it. But
really? Because that's not how this podcast started.
I'm getting it out of my system. I like you guys.
Wow.
So anyway, it's also that there are things like counterspells that just aren't fun for newer players. So you want those players to be introduced to some of these mechanics at a lower frequency than the expert players who are already invested and aren't likely to be chased away by that sort of thing. So you begin by having these really simple decks that are free. Then you move up to what they call the intro decks. I think they used to be called the intro decks, now they're called something else. But they're just little pre-constructed decks you can buy for like $20. Usually you can get two at once.
Like starter
decks? Play them
decks?
against your friends. Yeah, well, starter decks, they're even simpler than starter decks, because starter decks, they used to be like just 40 cards, like big booster packs.
Yeah, and they've changed their naming scheme of these things for a while. Like, it would start with those free decks that you get at conventions or whatever. Then, like OldManStompy said, these usually, like, for instance, I don't know if this is a good example, but they used to have like elves or goblins, and they used to have like other combo decks like that came with two so you could play with a friend and just get one thing. It was like $20 for two decks.
Okay.
And they usually came with mostly common and uncommon cards and like a few rares and like one mystic, just so those people who do want to collect, they'll know what card they're getting. And then I would say, would you say from there they expect the fat pack kind of thing?
So it's generally opening boosters. So, like, you can buy a fat pack. Like, I buy a fat pack. I don't really buy Magic product that much anymore, although I follow the game competitively very closely. I buy the fat packs because they come with 9 or 10 packs, and my wife and I, we build sealed decks from them, like 60 card decks, and we fight them against each other, because that's a little bit more fun than you get more rares, and it's a little bit more interesting than and it teaches you how to build a deck.
Yeah, and it gives you a little bit more control. Like, if you're playing with the starter decks, these are the two decks, and even if you combine them, they probably don't work as well with shifting cards because both decks are meant to revolve around some sort of idea or whatnot. Yeah. Whereas if you have the fat pack, then you can make your own decks, and it might last you a little bit longer with decks that they might still not work together because, again, the boosters are entirely random.
Right. So part of what the Magic designers have been trying to do in the packs is they track what's called ASFAN, which is their internal term for if you open a booster pack, at what frequency does a certain type of card appear. So if there's a theme in your set and you want to express it to the players, what you have to do is make sure that what's called the ASFAN is high enough that you can open one arbitrary booster pack and you'll understand what the set is about.
Interesting.
I've never thought about that.
Yeah, so the lesson they learned this from was so when you buy the intro pack, usually you look at the front of it and there's like a big foil card, there's like a big dragon or a sphinx or a hydra or some like or an angel or some like really iconic monster. And so for a long time you thought that like the rare cards and the splashy cards were what drew people to the game, right? So there was a block called Kamigawa. It was the Japanese
themed one, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And the gimmick to that was that every rare was a legendary card. And there were even some uncommon legendary cards. But if you open one pack, how would you know that's the theme of the set? You'd open the pack and you'd see a legendary rare and you get really excited because it's probably pretty cool. You know, but you'd never know that was one of the themes of Kamigawa unless you bought more packs. But if you didn't see anything in the rest of the pack that interested you, you might not do that. And even if you bought 3 packs, well, you got 3 legends. That's great. What does that tell you about the themes of the set? It takes you a long time to understand that legendary matters is like a theme of the set. On the other hand, if it's a common theme, which you wouldn't do with legendary creatures, because otherwise they wouldn't feel special if they're common, you know, then you can express the set very easily because every set has 10 common cards. So even if the ASFAN is like 2 or 3, by the time you open 2 or 3 packs, you should know what the set's about. So...
Well, you know, ironically, though, that said, didn't the set Legends, I don't know if they ever had common legends, but didn't they have a bunch of uncommon legends? Like, everybody was a freaking legend in that set.
Legends, the older sets had really weird rarity schemes, so I wouldn't try to compare them to current sets. So, like, they had sheets that had much different distributions of rare cards. So, like, there were different distributions within rarities. So, like, you could have a rare 6 and a rare 1, meaning that some rares were like 6 times more common than other rares.
Okay.
And I think the legends in Legends were like uncommon 1 or rare 1, or that set didn't have rares.
Yeah, well that's the thing. 1. It was like Sulkanar the Swamp King. Like that's your super card? Like probably not. Oh, well, by the way, I do want to give just one quick shout out for the theme, just amusing themes. Like with Arabian Nights, that was plainly obvious with like every single card in the set. Everything was like desert themed or like fairy tale, like Arabian Nights. But I think one of my favorites is Antiquities, because every single card in that set that was not a basic land was either an artifact or at least had the word artifact somewhere on the card.
Yes, and that is how you do a theme. I mean, I don't know if you have to saturate it like that. There was also a set called Alara Reborn, where every card is multicolored, and that was really weird.
Wow.
And Morodin was another artifact-themed set,
so it's just impossible
correctly.
To play a single-color deck with that one.
So they fudged it a little bit. But, for example, like, if your set is entirely multicolor, you can't have cards that cost 1 mana. Because by definition, everything costs at least 2.
Yeah.
So what this all boils down to is that these sets are partially designed to introduce players via limited play, because that's actually how a lot of players who want to become invested build their collection. And there are games like Hearthstone that understand this, because like one of the entry points to Hearthstone, for example, is the arena early on, where you draft a deck. You don't use your cards, you draft a deck and you play it, and try to get to a certain number of wins. So Blizzard definitely understood that this was like a great entry point for players to like do this. And now you have like these living card games like Netrunner, right? I don't know if you can speak, Pyro. I know you play these games that work kind of on the same philosophy that it's important to make sure that your deck functions based on the cards that are of higher frequency. So it's not quite like common cards, but the ones that show up more often. Because
I think the living card games are a little bit different. The living card games are a little bit different because whenever you buy a booster pack, you always get a full playset. But I will say that from my recollection of them, every booster pack has a common, not like a theme, because let's say in one set there's 6 boosters, whatever you want to call, or expansions, whatever you want to call them. But I think each of those 6 might have a common sort of mechanic that they have, just so if you want that mechanic, you just buy that one booster, or like maybe 2 boosters that you might want to get all the cards that have that sort of mechanic to them.
So, does it always come with a maximum playset, and you build the deck from that?
Yeah, so like if I bought Expansion 2, it's going to come with 6 cards, and 3 of each of those 6 cards. So there's no randomness involved at all.
Okay, that's interesting. It's a bit of a different angle.
That's what makes living card games. That's why a lot of people have moved to living card games, because they got tired of the whole random boosters, and they want to know what cards they're getting. So it also, on the other hand, levels the playing field a little bit. So if you want to be competitive, you don't have to buy singles that are like really expensive. You just say, you know what, I want this card in my deck, so I'll buy this booster pack, and hey, I can make these other decks now too because I have these extra cards.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say that, or just real quick, I was gonna say that, yeah, I was gonna mention leveling the playing fields, because games like Magic the Gathering really favor the rich kids, because they can either buy the specific card they want, however much it costs, or at the very least they could just keep buying booster packs until they find it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess the only downside to that would be what happens if you only want one card in a booster pack and you have to buy like the entire booster pack. Though I guess it's mitigated a little bit because now you know you're getting a fixed number of cards, and if like the meta shifts a little bit and you really want to use the other cards in the booster pack, or you want to use a new deck that uses them, you already have them, and you don't have to go off and buy another pack.
What got me to stop playing Netrunner, other than the fact that I didn't have a lot of people to play with, was kind of that fact. The fact that it was, let's say, $10 for the booster that came with, let's say, 30 cards, 3 of 10 cards, which wasn't bad. It was actually a pretty good deal if you think about it. It was more the frequency then they release those expansions, because in Magic you have 2 sets in a year now, let's say. Still a lot of cards if you want to collect them all or get a full play set of all those cards. But because they didn't have that reason for people to keep buying Netrunner cards, they had to release them more often. So there were, even though they were $10 for one of these boosters, there were more than 6 of them in a year, let's say. So that was over $60 you're spending, which again is not much compared to what some people spend on Magic. But it's one of those things that I buy, it's October, so I buy that month's expansion. And then I don't get to play, I play once or twice that month, and then it's now November, and I buy the next expansion. It was like a subscription to a MMO that I didn't actually play that often.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how often did you play Netrunner? I know I played it with you at MagFest, I think, for the first time.
Not very often, and I will say that I still have the cards, and whenever anyone wants to play, but I have a new living card game that I play a lot more frequently, because also I feel that the new one, it's called Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn.
Okay,
yeah, that's a little bit more welcoming to new people, because the thing about Netrunner was it's a really cool game, and I like it because it's asymmetric. So both sides of the duel are worrying about different things. And especially because the corporation, who's the quote-unquote bad guys, they are playing with hidden cards, whereas but they have a countdown, basically. They need to get these things, these what are called agendas, going before the runner can steal them. So it was really cool that it was that asymmetric, but again, it was really hard to get new people into it, because if you have them play as the corporation first, they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing, because it can be very much a shell game where you're trying to like hide where you're putting these things. You don't really understand how you're supposed to get your money going. But on the other hand, if you have them play the runner first, they have no idea. They even have less of an idea what to do, because they don't understand the whole idea of the hidden cards. So it was really hard to get started. Whereas Ashes is a lot more similar to Magic, so it's really easy to get people into that who've played Magic. But also the cool mechanic. So one of the issues that even Richard Garfield said he didn't like about Magic was the land system. The whole land ramp is not really that great of a mechanic, but it just stuck with them for so long, and they can't change it now. Whereas in Ashes, it's a little different, so I can't really compare them. But you have dice that you roll, and that's basically your mana for that turn, and you spend them. But the cool thing is, it's not like Magic where you were talking about we were talking the other day about Magic combos in Magic, and that they can sometimes take an hour to finish or whatever it is. But in Ashes, I play one card, then it's your turn to play one card, then I play one card, and we keep alternating turns, spending our mana. Then once we run out of dice or have decided that we both want to pass, we then take our dice, roll them again, and we start over again. So it's a lot more balanced in that sense, because I'm not going to play 20 cards and say, all right, your turn, what are you going to do with it? I can play at most one card, so it's a lot easier for you to keep up with the shift of the game.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I mean, it isn't necessarily as bad as having these like combo decks that have these non-converging but semi-infinite combos that take forever to resolve. But generally speaking, people feel really bad when they don't have agency, even if they're fighting with roughly equal decks. So, like for example, we talked about blue on the last podcast, and about how blue is the color of no, and just making the game miserable for the other players, which is still somewhat accurate. Blue is still the reactive color, but what that means is if you don't know what reactions you're supposed to take, or whether or not they're appropriate, like if you have a counterspell, if you don't know whether or not you're countering your opponent's best spell, or if they're trying to trick you into countering something, then if you're the blue player, you'll feel pretty bad, because you like wasted all your reactive spells, and once your opponent has proactive cards like creatures attacking you, there isn't very much you can do about it. On the other hand, if you're playing like your proactive creature deck, and your opponent's a really good blue player, then you'll just never get to do anything, and it will be extremely frustrating for you on both sides of the equation. So, like, for there to be an integral balance to the game where both players get to play spells, I can see that being, like, a really good center point to build a game around. I mean, I'm surprised that he spoke so negatively about the mana system, because, like, the current Magic designers are very high on it as one of the best parts of Magic. And, like, Hearthstone has definitely tried to... Hearthstone is an example of a game that sort of tried to riff on it.
Yeah, and I think the other cool thing, I don't know if you ever played the World of Warcraft card game, like before Hearthstone.
I have not.
The mana system was very similar to Magic, but any card can be used as mana. So I could say, I have this hand of cards, which one do I want to use, and put it like face down as my mana, whatever that game called mana. So any card can function as it. You just have to decide which cards you can spend at that point in the game to fuel other cards going forward.
So particular cards cost cards then?
Well, what you do is like you have a hand of, let's say, 7 cards, and they all do something. They're all not just there are no mana cards. I don't think there are any land type of cards in it. They're all like spells or creatures or whatever, and you can just say, you know what, this creature is good, but I need to pay more cards, so I'm going to put him face down, or whatever the game was.
Imagine, Lotus, you could play a zombie card as also a swamp.
But it can never function as a zombie again.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. So cards cost cards. That actually is a clever idea. Because
I want to clarify. I want to clarify. You don't permanently spend cards. Like, so you still tap the face down card and untap it on your next turn to use it again. So it's more like you can exhaust face down cards to pay for other cards.
No, I mean that's still like a really good idea, because
then you don't get mana screwed.
I was just going to use the term, mana screwed, because like I have all these cool cards that cost like 5 mana and I don't have any lands. I guess I'm just going to sit here and just get my ass kicked and keep drawing one new card each turn and hope it's something worthwhile and just die before I get to do anything in the game at all,
So there are good points and bad points to that, and I just like to play devil's advocate a little bit from the perspective of the Magic designers who retain this, mechanic, obviously. Not just because it's, sunk into the game, because they could easily just make spells that can be played as lands and resolve the whole problem, right? So that exists in games like Duel Masters, it exists in World of Warcraft, like you said. There are games like Hearthstone where the mana is automatically generated, so you just go up by 1 land every turn.
Yep.
I think the Marvel Versus system also did that, where you just escalate by 1 mana every turn. And what I think they found is that leads to a certain level of homogeneity in every game, where if you always... so the mana system in general is a positive because it leads to the escalation of spells. It makes the game... move towards a conclusion, because you can cast these haymakers that hopefully will win the game for you, and whoever's the last man standing wins. But if there isn't like a difference in each player's development in some way, then it tends to make every game play out pretty much exactly the same, and I think that was kind of what eventually killed Versus. Like, it's very hard to create divergent gameplay experiences if every game plays out the same.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's one of those balancing systems when you're making the game, because... on one hand, the mana system's good because you're growing into these giant battles. But if one person can't keep up, then it's not as much fun for that player. At a point, because there might still be that challenge that they feel, but at some point, if they're not getting what they need, it can feel like I can't do anything right now. Or on the other hand, if the ramp is equal, or if there is no mana system, let's say like Ashes, it's more fair per game, but it's very linear in terms of the play of the game. I have summoned a creature, and I've summoned a creature, and then you summon a creature, let's say, and then I kill your creature. Okay, then you summon a creature, and then there's the shift is very linear, whereas Magic it might be more exponential. But one hand, the players catching up can be a problem too.
So, another example would be if you don't understand the game very well yet and you're trying to evaluate how you played, if you take your deck and play it against my deck, and we're playing Ashes, and you beat me twice in a row, and the games play out roughly similarly, then it's hard for me to find a hook where I say if this game had played differently, or if I had done this differently, then I might have been able to beat you. That depends on my understanding of the game as a theorist and nothing else. If I lose because I didn't draw my 5th land, then I can say, or if I beat you, because you didn't draw enough lands, then I know, that's a vector that I can use to beat you. That means that some percentage of the time I'm going to win, even though I'm an inferior player. Not very often. It can't be that often, or else it will be very frustrating for high-level players. But if you believe it can happen, because really good players, they also structure the deck so that doesn't happen very often. So they always have things to do to draw into more lands. But if I believe that I can win if you don't draw your lands, then it makes me more likely to want to play you again.
And
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'll say actually not to change the topic from mana generation to something else, but another cool thing that I think Ashes does that I don't know if it would break Magic, especially because of some of the combos that have going, but in Ashes they have a mechanic called the first 5, meaning you pick what 5 cards you start with.
Oh.
So if you have a combo that you're looking for, I mean, I think it only works because of the alternating turns. So like I could play a card, then I can't play 5 cards in a row, so I can't be like, bam, I win with this combo that I made. But it really is cool because if you understand your deck of 30 cards and you're like, these 5 I need to get my thing going, it allows a little bit more agency when you're creating your deck.
So here's the counterexample for Magic. My deck is 4 lands and 56 non-lands, and my starting 5 is my 4 lands and my 1 drop.
Yeah.
Now I never draw lands for the rest of the game. So this has actually been explored by the Magic designers. It was in Tempest originally.
I love Tempest.
They tried to put that mechanic in. Tempest, for those unfamiliar, is a set from like the mid-90s.
Yeah, like 96, I think.
Set, yeah.
There were 7.
So that was briefly in the design file, and it was taken out exactly for that reason, because it's way too easy to build a deck that only has like a certain number of lands and the rest spells, and it like totally breaks the way Magic plays as a game. But it's a good idea if your game does not have a mana system like Ashes.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things. For anyone who might be thinking that I'm shitting on Magic and whatever, they're both designed very differently, and the mechanics we're talking about fit with the game. So Ashes would not be the same game if it had a mana system, or it didn't have the first 5, because it has all these other mechanics that are working along with it. Same with Magic, and Magic has had a ton of years, and I'm not saying it's bad. I've grown apart from it. We've had our good moments and our bad moments, but sadly I had to break up with it because it was doing harms to my wallet. But I will say that I did enjoy playing it, and actually talking about it now, I kind of want to buy a Fat Pack just to play it again and just build some decks.
I would be happy. So this year is the 25th anniversary of Magic.
Oh,
so
okay.
There'll be a lot of interesting projects coming out. And
Wait,
I know, like I said,
year?
my wife and I... Yes, this year will be the 25th anniversary of Magic.
Oh, that's right, 1993. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're releasing a set just called 25, and it'll be a Masters set, meaning a bunch of reprints of cards going all the way back to Alpha.
Okay.
So maybe we could buy a box, and we could do a draft as a group of 8 or something.
Yeah, that'd be
cool.
cool.
More players. Or we can do what my wife and I do.
Yeah,
just buy the Fat Pack.
Either one's fine, and now that you live in New York, or closer to New York, I should say, it would be a little bit easier to get something like that going.
Get ready for some sweet Fallen Empires action.
That, you can still buy Fallen Empires packs for, like, basically nothing.
Yeah, that set was never worth anything, even when it was current.
And it was only 8 cards per booster pack, when a normal Magic set is about 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
at least
the
these
set
days.
itself was also smaller. But you know what the funny thing is though, if you are playing an only Fallen Empires game, I think that would actually be pretty fun.
Actually,
So there was actually a Pro Tour shortly after the release of Fallen Empires. It was followed up by Homelands, which is also one of the worst sets in Magic history, and they were required to
But
put
Baron
cards from those sets
Sengir
into the
though.
deck. Yeah, well, anyway.
one thing I want to mention, not to go back to something we talked about 20 minutes ago, when you were talking about booster packs and their layout, I've always known that they had, let's say, one rare or a very low chance of a mystic rare now, let's say 4 uncommons and 10 commons. I don't know the actual breakdown, but I've always known that there was some breakdown in terms of that. I never thought that there was also some other math going on where there had to be a certain number of cards
Yeah,
to
thematic.
show off the theme or mechanic.
I actually really want to talk about this for just a bit, because it boils down, because it leads into sort of something that's happened recently in Magic design, and it sort of came from the core set going away. So, like I said, the block set structure shifted from 3 and 1, where the 3 were a block and the core set.
When was the first time they actually did the two per block?
So I think it was about 2 years ago. I know they went back to Innistrad, since we mentioned it before. They did a 2-set return to Innistrad. That's the new format. So previously it was 3 sets in a block and then a core set. And now every year it's 2 and 2, 1 per world. So the next new structure, which I think will start next year, will be 3 again and a core set. But the 3 won't necessarily be tied together. They'll just be large sets that represent story points in the overarching plotline of Magic.
Interesting. So they're no longer they're actually following a story.
Yeah, so
I mean they used to,
yeah.
but it used to be like 1 block per. It used to be like, let's say, arcs in a story, whereas now they're just, here's the next point. That's actually a really cool way of doing it.
Yeah, so that means they stay on a world basically as long as is necessary for the plot. But it's also changed the way they think about set design. It's related to the math you were talking about. So, just to use an example that even Lotus would know from back in the day, you know the card Lightning Bolt, right? It's
it's old school.
It's a very powerful red spell. It costs 1 mana and it does 3 damage to target creature or player, which, without working out the numbers, is way ahead of the mana curve for Magic. It's very powerful. And they reprinted it in 2010. It was quite a big deal because it's a really powerful card, and people have really fond memories of playing Lightning Bolt, back in the 90s when that card was still considered to be on curve. Like, this was at the time, like, an alpha where you could, draw 3 cards for 1 mana, for example. So, Lightning Bolt wasn't the biggest effort at the time. Yeah.
Then there's the famous Black Lotus, which costs 0 mana, and it gives you 3 mana of any one color. So,
and it figures that you would know that because your name is Lotus Prince. What a coincidence!
But I mean, with a Black Lotus, you really could theoretically end the game if you had a lucky hand on turn 1 or 2.
I think that adds a really cool thinking, though, to it, because I know that as far as I remember, in most blocks, not blocks, most of the series, let's say the yearly sets, they re-release cards with different names to keep that idea going. Like Fireball, they usually reprint a version of Fireball in almost every set. So with this idea of 3 big sets a year, I guess they have to really think of the half-life, if you want to call it that, of a card type. So like if they release Fireball in the first set, they have to think about how long do we wait until we release a new Fireball type, because you're not going to want to release one of those every single big set, because 1, it will clutter that set with cards you might not need, and 2, unless you want people to have 12 copies of that card because they all have different names.
That's the thing, they clutter their own hands with it.
So this is important, and it's part of the problem they had with getting rid of the core set, because the core set is where you used to put all those staples, right? Just because it was the part of the Magic's release schedule where you weren't tied into like a world's mechanics. You could just put whatever you wanted into it. So, and the rotation will still be the same. It'll still be 2 years worth of sets in standard. So if you just want to know if a card is in standard or not, like you just make sure you put 1 of each effect that you want to have in standard in each year's worth of sets, and then you only have to worry about the rotation happening, what rotates out. And so what's in your first set in that next block, that tends to be the most, like the fulcrum for like the shift in the metagame. But to get back to Lightning Bolt a little bit, imagine you're drafting the set. Now, for those unfamiliar, a draft means that you open up a pack. You have 3 packs, and you're in a pot of 8 people. And you open up a pack, you pick a card out of it, and you pass it to the left. And then you repeat until you've opened all 3 packs and drafted 45 cards. So that means usually you're trying to get, Magic has 5 colors, right? And you can't, it's not easy to play cards from every color in your deck. So you're trying to focus on 1 or 2 colors. But if you have a card like Lightning Bolt, that only costs 1 red mana, it does 3 damage, which is a lot for 1 mana. It'll kill most cards you see at common in Magic, which means it'll kill most creatures at any point in the game. So if you just take that Lightning Bolt and put a mountain in your deck, odds are, as long as you drew both of them together, even if your deck isn't mostly red, you can still play that Lightning Bolt. Right?
And by the way, not only that, even if you're not playing red, you might want Lightning Bolt solely so someone else doesn't get it.
That too, you can
hate drafting.
Yeah.
So it means that instead of the red player getting all the Lightning Bolts, their deck will be substantially weaker because those Lightning Bolts are going to everybody. So what they've done is they've moved those really powerful removal spells and answers. For one, sometimes they don't even print them in the non-core sets. But for 2, they've also moved them up to slightly higher rarity. That means they're kind of harder to get. That means casual players don't have like the premium removal spells unless they pay a lot of money for them, which is unfortunate. It's usually not.
It sounds like most free-to-play games.
Yeah, so it's a bit unfortunate. It also means that in Standard, there aren't a lot of cheap, efficient answers to powerful threats. Which reduces player agency, and those cards used to go in the core set, but the core set doesn't exist anymore. So I can see what they're trying to do, but Magic is at this weird tipping point where threats are really powerful, and as a result, they've had to ban like a lot of cards for the first
I will
time in
say
a really long time.
That is also another reason why I started to drop out of Magic, and I know this is. I'm looking at it from a different viewpoint as someone who's played a lot more often than me. But a lot of times when I see cards, no matter what rarity they are, I might be like, that seems really overpowered. But I know that obviously they have answers to them. But I just feel like sometimes they feel like they can put powerful cards in as long as they put an answer. But I don't think that... I don't know. I always have a weird view on that. And I had the same way with Hearthstone. When I see powerful cards that I'm like... If it feels like it's unfair to most players because they might not have that, most casual players, because they won't have that answer.
That's where I was going to go. What are the odds that you have the answer and are expecting that card in the first place?
Yeah, so like imagine I open my pack of Alpha and I open Shivan Dragon, which was like one of the best creatures back in the day. It was just a big flying dragon. So that's a rare card. That means that most people won't have more than 1 or 2 Shivan Dragons. And they were expensive, too. They were like $20, which is a lot of money to pay for a Magic card, like back at that point. Like a Black Lotus was like $5, just for context, when the first set came out. Just because...
well, it's a dragon. Everyone wants a dragon.
Everybody wants a dragon, and there just wasn't that much to do with 3 mana, unless you happen to have like one of the combo kills from the later sets. But... The prime kill spell is like Terror. Terror is a 2 casting cost spell that kills any non-black, non-artifact creature. So it kills your Shivan Dragon. That was a common. So everybody had terrors coming out of their ears. So you had the cards to answer your opponent's bomb rare. Like, the really interesting games, I guess, were when both players drew their Shivan Dragon and they were just bashing them into each other, and that was usually kind of fun, I guess. But mostly they just died. Like, Counterspell, that was a common card. Lightning Bolt was a common card. Like, all these powerful answers were commons, and now they're not anymore. So it's hard to draft. For one, like, drafts tend to revolve around bomb rares. And it's hard to find the right answers to them. And I can appreciate that Magic has gotten to this point because they're trying to solve, like, very finely tuned problems that the older sets used to have. So I don't want to make excuses for them, but, like, they're trying to grow a game which has grown in player base for, like, almost every single one of its 25 years. And to find extra ground to improve the game and to make it more appealing to people, like, that's really hard to do. So,
I wanted to say, kind of to that point, bring up something that the rotation definitely helps. Like, when you can rotate out mechanics, and that, 1, you want to make sure that the amount of mechanics is manageable, and 2, it lets you take out cards that don't balance well with other cards. but also being able, like, I agree, it's hard to keep coming up with new things. Talking about Hearthstone, I was one of the people who got really, really annoyed when they decided to start doing like rotations. Originally, they just kept releasing expansions, and you could just play with all the cards. But then, one of the expansions, I think a year or two ago, they rotated out the first expansion. Like, the core set is always there, but the first expansion, they're like, you can no longer play with this in standard. But what annoyed me the most about it, which I guess Magic does it too, more because it's a physical card game, but in Hearthstone, you can't even buy that expansion anymore.
Right.
And that kind of annoys me, more so than anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a collectible card game, right? If you can't collect it, then, like, for a lot of people, that takes away some of the appeal. Even if you just want some of the cards for sentimental value.
Yeah, even if I know that I can't play with any of the cards from, I think it was Goblins vs. Elves was the first expansion, I still would like to buy them, especially because they do have a mode where you can play with any set. They call it Wild. They're like, and they basically tell you when you're going in, none of these cards are balanced, so just realize that when you play. Yeah, but the fact that I can not buy Goblins vs. Elves, but I'll still be able to see other people play them, kind of irks me a little bit.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
They actually did re-release Goblins vs. Elves. They made an anthology of the dual decks, and you can repurchase it. So
I'm talking about Hearthstone. I don't know if you're talking about Magic. I'm talking about Hearthstone.
You mentioned the dual deck for intro players, so I guess I got a little confused.
Yeah. Oh, it's that's sorry. It's Goblins vs. Dwarves is the Hearthstone one. But yeah, okay. So they stopped. You can't buy it, but you can still play against people who have it, which gets kind of annoying. And the other part is they actually released single player expansions of Hearthstone, where you're kind of dungeon crawling in a sense with your cards. But again, you can't buy them from a certain time ago, even though they're basically just single player content.
So the corollary to that, of course, is that you still need the rotation, because if you don't have a rotation, the only way to get people to buy your cards is to make them more powerful than their existing cards, right? So, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has this problem. Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, barely ever rotates, so every time they come out with a new set, they just have to... Like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, like, a prime example of how not to design a card game, even though it's still extremely popular, I guess partially because of branding, and also because the cards are just really cool looking.
And because they're super powerful, that probably helps a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, for players who are invested, it like and if you're new, then you just buy the newer cards and you know that you'll get the best the best themes for the new decks they're trying to support. But like, there's only so many places you can go. Like in the Pokemon card game and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, there have been like one-turn kills and first-turn kills that have just been part of the competitive metagame. Like, it's really hard to play a card game when you feel like it can end on the first day, on the first turn, right?
On the first day. Multi-day games.
I hope it's the first day. Like, if the games are that fast, it should go pretty smoothly, right? So Magic has been in this scenario where they had to ban... They made a card called Emrakul. So Emrakul is one of the Eldrazi. They're like Lovecraftian ores. It was designed so that it costs 13 mana, which is a lot. It's hard to get to 13 mana in the course of any game, unless your deck is designed to like generate huge amounts of mana, like very specifically designed to do nothing else than that. But it turned out they also put enough support in the set that you could regularly do it. And part of the reason they did that was because when they had the next Pro Tour, they wanted Emrakul to be an important part of the standard metagame, so players would see it and then want to go out and buy packs of the set, to get Emrakul. But it had a rider effect where if you... after you cast it, not even if it resolved, if you cast it, you also got this second trigger that couldn't be hit with a regular counterspell that said you control your opponent during their next turn.
Huh. Oh, so that's basically word of command from way back when. Word
of command is one spell. Word of command says you can control your opponent while they cast one spell. I get to control you during your entire turn. And
wait, wasn't there an older card that did that, though? I mean, newer than Word of Command, but wasn't there something else?
Yes, there are a couple of older spells that do that. One was from Mirrodin, so
that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah. It's called Mindslaver.
Yes.
And it is like one of the most frustrating experiences that they have ever produced in Magic. You can imagine how much it sucks to have someone like look at your hand and see your like handful of like terrors or lightning bolts and like aim them at all of your creatures. And then whatever else is left over, they just attack, because you just played a giant creature.
Or even just discard them.
Right. Well, I mean, you usually can't like manually discard cards in Magic unless you have. It's usually not part of the rules.
Back when mana burn was a thing, you could just tap all of your lands and not do anything with it, and just take obscene damage.
Yes, that still happened when Mindslaver was originally printed, so you could have someone take mana burn. Although they might have Mindslaver might have had a writer that you couldn't give mana burn. I don't remember.
It might have.
But anyway, so that's frustrating enough as it is. You know, imagine like Emrakul came out in Innistrad, which is a graveyard themed set. So there were cards that brought creatures back from the graveyard. You know, imagine if you played Emrakul and then your opponent, after having their turn taken away from them, still managed to deal with it. Now you just cast another Emrakul, or you bring your first Emrakul back from the graveyard and play it again.
Yeah.
Like, imagine how frustrating it must be to play against that, and you know, and now your opponent's also playing an Emrakul deck because it's the best deck in the format. So now you're both just taking each other's turns for like the entire tournament.
Well,
That's
actually,
really frustrating.
Speaking of which, if you do have an Emrakul, like I understand that the whole point is that it's this like eldritch horror, right? But like, if it costs that much to summon, then you probably aren't even playing a mana generating deck. You're probably playing like a discard deck, and then you resurrect it for like 1 or 2 mana or something, if that's allowed.
Yeah, but you don't get the control effect unless you cast it.
Because I was thinking like Phyrexian Dreadnought had like a caveat where like it's a 12/12 creature, but it only costs 1 mana to bring out. But when you bring it out, you have to sacrifice creatures that amount to a total of like 12 HP from your team. So like you're getting punished for bringing it out. But that said, though, even if you don't do the control effect, the fact that it's an Eldritch Horror in the first place should mean that it's just like it should be really hard to summon, because like the whole point of Lovecraftian horrors is that like you're never actually going to see them, but if you do, you know, like that kind of thing. Like every single Lovecraftian story is like the exception to the general rule. Most of us haven't seen abominations from the other side of the veil, you know?
Yeah, and I mean that's the feeling you're supposed to get. It was designed because it was supposed to feel like intrusive.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't want to take this conversation on like a totally different route, but I will say that these conversations got me curious about what the next sets were, and I noticed Unstable, which is the third unset.
Yes. I am extremely happy about
that's
this.
great.
In December, so that might get me back into Magic.
Yeah, unglued, unhinged,
actually,
unstable.
Yeah, 13 years after Unhinged. So for those unfamiliar, so the unsets are satire Magic sets. They're not tournament legal at all. They have no formal rules definition. The cards are supposed to be just like grokkable. You're just supposed to look at the card and understand what it's supposed to do. Like there's a card called Knight of the Hokey Pokey, where you have to do like a piece of the hokey pokey. So I'm really excited about Mark Rosor, the lead designer, and also the lead designer of the unsets, to see what he's been he's been trying to get the set published since Unhinged came out 13 years ago.
Wow.
And I've been told that the set has been in development since 2011.
That's nuts.
Wow.
By the way, you know what else I do love about the unsets is that as intentionally stupid as all their cards are, those are the only sets that I'm aware of where the land cards have no text.
Are worth more than normal land cards.
Well, not even worth more, but just like they just look gorgeous. Like instead of having the standard portrait in the top of the card and the lower half is like the text that says like tap it to produce 1 red mana or whatever, like the whole card is just a gorgeous picture of land. Like people collect the unlands even without collecting the unsets.
So, yeah, they
in Zendikar they brought that back.
Okay.
And they went back to Zendikar and they brought it back again. And you know what else has it? Amonkhet. Because part of Nicol Bolas's plan to take over the plane was to erect a giant statue of his horns that can be seen from the same angle from every point in the plane. So part of like selling his vanity was that they put the full art lands back in the set, and you can see his horns in every single land card.
I love like little
cool.
like I love like subtle nods like that, where like Nicol Bolas affects like not just the universe within the game, but the game itself. Like you are seeing it.
The other thing is that we didn't really mention. So Zendikar and Return to Zendikar, like the big theme of both those games were land, and that's why they were full art cards.
Oh, by the way, go ahead.
It was like a D&D style set. So
awesome.
there were like allies that were represented like D&D adventurers. You could buy like Trusty Machete was a card, and Blazing Torch for exploring the crypts.
Wow.
And they had maps and quests, and your allies could level up. Kind of. There was some mechanic for leveling up.
That's fantastic. That almost reminds me of Innistrad, where like a lot of creatures had a front and a backside to their cards, so there'd be like normal, like, you know, aristocrat, and then if you pay a certain cost, you flip his card, and he like turns into a vampire or a werewolf or something. Like,
and actually, that was both. That like the backsides were always like the full moon cards or something like that.
Yeah, that's what it was.
If I remember correctly.
Like that. Although,
So
yeah.
the Eldrazi are actually from Zendikar.
Yeah.
And they went, and the last one, Emrakul, went to Innistrad. So when they had the transform cards again in Innistrad, in the second set, they transform into like Lovecraftian horrors, which is pretty cool.
That's fantastic. By the way, I will say, like, I know you said that the unsets tend to have simple, if stupid, like, things you do. Like, this creature has protection from insert the name of a particular artist here. So any cards drawn by this artist cannot hurt you. But there was one card that I always got a kick out of. It does have a definite meaning, but it takes a little bit to unpack. Do you remember the card Ambiguity?
Yes.
That card's great.
I do not.
I forgot exactly what it said, but it was something along the lines of like counter target spell with counters, but only if it has been countered already, and not with counters. It was like it just kept going like that.
So,
it's like what?
I'll read it out to you.
Okay.
And part of it, this is important because some of these effects have been changed. Like so, playing a spell has now been called casting a spell for this reason.
Okay.
But the spell says, and I quote, "Whenever a player plays a spell that counters a spell that has been played, or a player plays a spell that comes into play with counters, that player may counter the next spell played, or put an additional counter on a permanent that has already been played but not countered."
Yeah, it's not that complicated, but it sounds really funny to say. And if you're learning English, this card will fuck you up.
Another card that I really liked was the I forget what it's called, but it basically has like a name that's so long it has to go along the sides of the card too.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's like 5, like, you know how you have pay X mana to do this?
Yeah.
It has like 4 or 5 variables. Like it costs
Oh yeah, it was
blue mana and like X, Y, and Z.
It was a Nightmare of Wizards of the Coast customer service, I think.
Yes. Yes.
And
it
was a fireball. It was a fireball, but it was a red spell that had a blue background on it. So it's like
and like it's like do X damage to Y target creatures from Z players or something like that.
Yeah, it was outrageous. I also remember they had the BFM, the Big Furry Monster, which was a 99/99 creature, which is effectively a game ender, and it costs something like 15 black mana, so it just looks really weird to see, like, you know, normally if a spell costs, like, you know, 6 mana, it's usually going to be, like, the number 5 in gray, you could spend whatever you want on it, and the 6th color is actually a color, like, so you'll see, like, the number 5 in, like, a tree, like a green tree, or maybe it'll cost like 4 colorless and like 2 greens if you want to push a little harder. This thing costs 15 black, so it's just icons all across the top of the card, and the BFM is so big, it's 2 cards. Like, you need both cards to summon it. It's like freaking Exodia and Yu-Gi-Oh, and it might even be a reference to that.
Yeah, so it's actually, I'm curious about this because so Mark Rosebar has been dropping hints that Unstable is going to have vanilla mythic rare, meaning a mythic rare with no rules text, just reminder text. Which is kind of weird, right? Because you'd expect a mythic rare to be really complicated. They usually are very complicated. So what would they do to a mythic rare to make it vanilla? Like, one option is that it's like Exodia, and it's actually like maybe it's printed on the back of all 15 mythic rares or something in the set, and you just have to assemble them like a 3x5 matrix.
I think some of my favorite cards were the double cards, like double dip, double whatever.
Oh, yeah.
That's like gain 5 life now and 5 life at the beginning of the next time you play against this person.
Yeah, that's
so like
irritating.
they really like those cards. Oh, they like those cards, but they're like impossible to program into Magic Online, which is why Unglued has never made it onto the online client, which is unfortunate.
Oh, actually,
but I think there's also the promo card. So the second set, Unhinged, had an ass sub theme, literally donkeys. So there was a card called Ass Whoopin', I think it's called, that was like, destroy target permanent in a game that you can see from where you are.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. Yeah, like, you just mess with someone else's game, even if it's like a proper competition. It's like, whatever, man, I'll follow my own rules.
Mm-hmm. There's also I think it's called AWOL, which is like, so Magic had a zone in the game called Removed from the Game. It was supposed to represent like things that were not part of the game anymore.
It's kind of like Exiled now, right?
Well, now it's called Exile because it's actually a game zone. But it was supposed to be like removed from the game.
Yeah.
So, but like things started to be able to interact with, like things started to be able to come back from exile, just to like mix up the gameplay a little bit. And so AWOL had like
I remember this.
remove target creature from the game, and then remove it from the remove from the games, and then put it from the really removed from the game.
Yeah, it was like the absolute removed from the freaking game forever, like zone or something like that. It was pretty great.
I think there was one I really liked just because I for personal reasons I think sheep are very cute. It's like my my animal of choice. And there's a card in the first one called Flock of Rabid Sheep. And I think it's like you win the game if you control a permanent with every letter of the alphabet in it.
Oh god.
So like that's like a really unusual, like card name is not usually like something that it factors into your ability to win the game, right?
Yeah. A card that I really liked from that was Protection from Denim.
Yep.
Because I used to play with these in high school with my friends, and whenever someone would play Protection from Denim, he'd make sure to tell us that if you have dollar bills in your wallet, they're made of the same material. So as long as you're carrying cash, then you can't defend against his creatures or whatever.
Wasn't there an actual story with this where like a judge had to rule on like removing pants as an action?
Yes, so this actually happened at the pre-release. The card is called Heirloom Wrangler.
Yes,
Wrangler
yes.
And so Rosewater, as the designer he served as the head judge and like the flavor arbitrator. And so he was walking around and he actually heard someone say, like, in response to your casting of Heirloom Wrangler, I remove my pants.
Yeah. And actually that also reminds me regarding the metagame is there's a famous card called Chaos Orb, which is like an actual official normal card, where the gimmick is you're supposed to flip it in the air, and it must do a full 360-degree flip. Like, you can't just drop it and cheat. You have to do a full flip in the air, and whatever it lands on is destroyed. So someone in a tournament actually ripped his card up into shreds and threw them everywhere and just nuked like the table, and I think they actually ruled in that player's favor. So there's a card in Unglued called Chaos Confetti, and the art is a picture of Chaos Orb being ripped, and Chaos Confetti works the same way, but you are supposed to rip that card up. And I remember I was playing against Perry once, and he actually used it on me. I couldn't believe it.
It turns out most people don't like ripping up their cards.
No.
So
correct.
That mechanic did not make an appearance in Unhinged, and it will probably not be in Unstable.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, as for one card that I kind of particularly get a kick out of, do you remember the Chi Stands Alone?
Yes, that is actually now a card in regular Magic.
What? Well, anyway.
Well, it's not called
it's not that
Chi
Chi
Stands Alone,
but even so, what? So yeah, the gimmick with that card is that if it's the only card you have on the field on your side, that means no other creatures, no enchantments, no lands. If this is somehow the only card that's there, like play it and then do a card that destroys all land of a particular type that you have or something, then you just win.
There is a 3-card combo that lets you win with that. I think it's so there are enchantments that like imprison something, remove it from the game, right?
Okay.
So you play one of those, and then you play Apocalypse, which is like destroy all permanents and discard your hand.
Yeah.
And then it just comes back, and then you get to your next upkeep and you win. So
okay.
That's pretty cool.
Jeez.
It's not called the Chi Stands Alone.
Yeah.
But there's a card called Barren Glory, which is the Chi Stands Alone.
Okay.
There is a kind of a long-term running gag in Magic that whenever like Rosewater is running out of ideas for a new Magic set, which happens because they design like 800, 900 cards a year.
Yeah.
That he like looks for things in an Unhinged that can plausibly be implemented in Black Butter Magic, and so like that was no exception. Some of them are just mundane, like and like the existence of the card is the gimmick. Like Unhinged has a card called Little Girl, which is like it costs like a half a white mana. And stats are like 1/2 power, 1/2 toughness.
Actually, there was one other card I wanted to mention. This is the last one that just really cracked me up because it brought back such stupidity.
This one really cracked him up as opposed to all the other ones, which only kind of cracked him up a little.
Well, no, the others I like, but this one actually made me laugh. There were some old cards. Like I forgot what kinds of cards they were. Maybe even one of the avatars where like. The cards were pretty powerful, but if you use this activated ability, it gains fly until end of turn. If you use that activated cost, it gains trample until end of turn. You can kind of manipulate its stats for a particular turn as you like. There was a card in Unglued or Unhinged, I forgot, called Avatar of Me, but you could pay some activated cost to give it stupid, obscure abilities that no one remembers, like phasing, flanking, banding. It's just like,
I remember
what?
all of them.
Yeah, like banding.
Phasing, every other turn, it can't do anything.
Yeah.
Flanking is, it gets plus...
Creatures
as long as
it get -1/-1.
Yeah, if they
as
do,
long
if they do not have
and
flanking.
then banding is, I think you get increased to +1/+1 for every other creature with banding.
Not at all what it does.
Banding,
what does banding do?
If like, the creatures that band together, I think, become like one giant creature.
And that's kind of what it's supposed to be. Really, it's just like a rules nightmare. And
Even when the ability was brand new, like everyone was like, I don't.
Because it's also like it mostly deals with how combat damage is assigned when.
What's the thing? Like, does somebody die? Like, I don't know.
So a joke about banding is that in Legends only there was an ability called Bands with Other, which wasn't even. You'd think it would be able to like band with other creatures that had banding, but it can only band with other creatures that have bands with other.
What?
And like Legends has a cycle of lands that remove bands with other specifically from creatures of a certain color. So there's like 5 lands, one that only removes. So like someone thought this ability was so powerful, like that they had to print answers to it in that set.
Well, that reminds me of Arabian Nights, where like there's always 5 basic land types. There's swamp, island, mountain, plains, and the last one, forest.
Forest.
But like all of a sudden, Arabian Nights had desert, which just was a land. But like my favorite was there was a creature, like there are creatures that have like forest walk. They're unblockable if the opponent has a forest. And there was like precisely one creature in the game that had like desert walk. And it's like, all right.
So there was also Great Wall in Legends, which means that says that all creatures that have planeswalk lose planeswalk.
Yeah, I remember that, and nobody has planeswalk.
Like maybe one creature had planeswalk, and someone asked, like, why doesn't everybody have planeswalk? And it's like, have you tried to sneak through the open plains? It's actually really hard.
Yeah, but I remember I think I've had a creature that had island walk. A bunch have forest and swamp walk. I remember 1 or 2 that had mountain walk, but I cannot think of anything that has planeswalk.
I think so in Portal, which you know because you bought a pack of it, there were cards for each of the Zodiac's creatures in the Chinese Zodiac.
Oh, that's Portal 3. It's Portal 3.
I think Zodiac Rooster has planeswalk.
Okay, well that's still well after Legends.
And I think also there's a card from Lorwyn, like these 2 goblins that have planeswalk, and they're called like Boggart Arsonists, and the theme is that they have planeswalk because they're setting the plane on fire. And nobody wants to mess with them.
Again, fair enough, but that's way after Legends. Like, did anything have planeswalk? Like,
it's so
maybe there's a card that gives target creature planeswalk.
I can't remember if it was Sleight of Mind or Magical Hack, but there was a card that said that you could change the text of target card.
Oh, you're right.
Changing the occurrence of one like land type with another land
to another. But you're not gonna. But that's not what you're gonna use it for ever.
Well, if you have Great Wall,
it has planeswalk now. What now? Like,
it's like, I could block you after all.
Yeah. Get the hell out of here.
So we had a pretty good discussion. If you guys want to mention like one last unhinged card, just to close things out. I know Lotus mentioned several.
Yeah, I think I'm done.
I don't really remember many more.
All right, I will remember
Mox
that
Lotus. Mox Lotus.
Mox Lotus, yes. They also had Gleemax, the brain that controls Wizards of the Coast. Costs like 1 million mana.
Yeah, it costs 1 million mana, but Mox Lotus gives you infinite upon tapping. I actually drew a foil Gleemax once. I was like, yes.
Nice. So that was a great discussion about Magic. You can tell we're all very excited, and maybe we can even stream some of the drafts that we do later. I know we've discussed getting into streaming.
We should stream us playing on whatever the new one is.
Unstable,
yeah.
Yes, I would be happy streaming just about anything with Lotus Prince if we get the unfiltered stream of consciousness from you.
Damn it, OldManStompy! I know you hack.
So anyway, I guess for us that's the show for this week. Please remember to subscribe to the Corrective Consciousness YouTube and Soundcloud pages. While there, please give us likes, thumbs ups, and 5-star ratings on iTunes, if you happen to be on iTunes. It helps us promote and spread awareness of the show, and any bit of encouragement keeps the show going. You can also catch us on Tuesday for our sister podcast, Corrective Consciousness, the podcast about our lives and pop culture. Finally, you can friend me as OldManStompy. on PSN, Xbox Live occasionally, and Twitter, and also on YouTube. I am not on Steam. Please don't look for me there. You can also friend Vice the Bold on as VYSETHEBOLD, but don't, because he's a jerk.
I mean, look at him. He's not even with us tonight.
As for you guys, go ahead.
Okay, well, you can follow me on my YouTube page, Lotus Prince. You can hit me up on Twitter at Lotus Prince, all one word. And if you wish to see my videos early, get in on exclusive live streams, or maybe even select which Let's Play I'm going to do next, you can catch me on my Patreon at patreon.com/Lotus Prince. Again, all one word. And fortunately, I like to think that I am not a jerk.
And you can find me as PyroJackFrost or Cloud08540 on most gaming sites and networks and other things of that nature.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Until next time, everyone.
Cheers!
Hey!